we're going to tell you tonight 3 stories, which is totally not my style. Normally, we take one person and we really understand the psychology and the life lesson of that one character of the Bible to understand what can we learn from that person. But tonight, Chanukah special, you're going to get 3 for the price of 1. I'm going to tell you about 3 different ladies, all heroes or heroines, I should say, of the Chanukah story. I'll start with the most famous and I'll end with the least famous. That's a little trick, by the way. I did that on purpose. So if you're watching us and you think you know the famous stories, stay tuned for the less famous story. And there's always not so well-known stuff. That's what makes this exciting. Because even though many of you are very educated people who have been to many, many classes for many years, there's a lot that we're learning that is beautiful, new stuff, new content. Correct? So, and then I will share with you the most beautiful thing I learned this Shabbos over the weekend. For the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about the fact that there's so many tremendous Chanukah miracles, and yet they're not recorded in the primary books of Jewish history. In fact, as I already mentioned, there's a book called Sefer HaMaccabim, the book of the Maccabees. The Christians have the book. It's not canonized in the Tanakh, even though it was written by originally in Hebrew, then translated to Greek. Then it was back to Hebrew later. Although we don't have the original. You have the Sefer Antiochus that talks about the story. You have like the Megillas Antiochus. So there were books written that recorded the miracles and the tremendous miraculous military victories that took place during the many years of the Chanukah story. And again, if you don't know all the details about the 25 years of wars and the 5 sons of Mattisyahu and how each one was killed in the different stories, go back to last week's class. And these are fascinating stories that are not well-known Chanukah stories of the oil. And we've talked about other perspectives why Chanukah is not written as a book of the Jewish people. I learned on Shabbos a Kabbalistic perspective. It's a little complicated, but I believe we can simplify it and give the idea and show you how a beautiful perspective on what's still happening today. The lesson for us from the Chanukah story, which is in the fact that there's no written Chanukah story. Okay? But let's start with 3 different women. The most famous of the 3 is a woman called Yehudis. Yeah, you're shaking your head. You've heard of Yehudis. Her story is a fascinating story. It's a tremendous story of bravery, of heroism, and of courage. It's not clear exactly when the story took place. There are different opinions when exactly the story of Yehudis actually happened. One second. There's different opinions when exactly the story happened. It's not the first time we have this story is in a book which was in that Sefer of the book of the Maccabees, which was translated to the Greek. So we don't even have the original version of the story. But there was a city called Bethulia in Israel. That's the city. And it was under siege by the Greeks. And the general of that particular army besieging the city of Bethulia was a man called Holofernes. Holofernes was his name. There was a big army, and they were fighting against this Jewish town. And at some point during the Chanukah story, which again, talking about 27 years of wars, at some point this town is besieged. And when the general saw he couldn't conquer them and he couldn't fight them, he did the easiest approach, which is to lay a siege, to go and just starve the city into submission till they have no food. Unlike today, where we have the UN, of course. So thankfully, the world is so safe with the UN protecting us all, and we have, I'm being sarcastic. In case it wasn't obvious, that was. They don't know I'm sarcastic. They don't know my sense of humor, huh? I could be funny sometimes, even though it wasn't a funny joke. It's not even funny. But today we live in a very kind world, full of people that care for the oppressed people of the universe, if they're anti-Jews, that is. The people starving in Syria, 500,000 people died, and no one cares. And then right now in Darfur and in what's it called? Where's the Taliban big right now in Afghanistan? You know what I'm saying? And then you have in the Boko Haram in Nigeria. No one cares about humanitarian aid there. There's no lines of humanitarian trucks coming with fuel and all that. They can all die. But in Gaza, we all anyway. Let's not distracted. So pre-humanitarian aid days and UN trucks to deliver food that would anyway be stolen by terrorists anyway. But so that's what he did. He put a siege on the city of Bethulia, and they were slowly beginning to starve. until eventually reached a point where the people gathered in the marketplace demanding that Uzziah, who was the commander of the army of the Jewish defense force in the city, should surrender to Holofernes, to surrender, and to whatever happens, but they're going to all die of starvation in the siege. So Uzziah was getting desperate, and he tried to calm down the people who were very upset. So he says to them, "Give me 5 days. Let's wait for a miracle. Give 5 days, because if in 5 days people are literally dying of hunger, then we will raise the white flag of surrender. But if not, let's wait." So he asked for 5 days. That was like the best he could do to push off the inevitable, doing whatever he can. At that moment, Yehudis spoke. Now, who is Yehudis? Again, it's not clear. There's different opinions. But the classic opinion is that Yehudis is the daughter of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who is also the father of Matisyahu. Now, last week I told you that there's different Yochanan Kohen Gadol. There's different Yochanans. Vivi's not here either. That's why I feel so empty, because Vivi's not here. So, yeah. That's what I said. So she was like, so Yochanan was the father of Matisyahu, and there was also a son of Matisyahu called Yochanan. And then there was also a nephew of Judah the Maccabee, who was the next generation. But she was the wife of the daughter of Yochanan the Kohen Gadol. It's not clear which one. Perhaps the sister of Matisyahu, but again, there's no definitive, clear answer exactly who she is, but probably or possibly she's a sister of Matisyahu, the daughter of Yochanan the high priest. And she was a young widow because her husband, whose name was Menashe, had passed away. So she was a very beautiful woman, a very gorgeous woman, a very regal and royal woman of tremendous chen and of beauty and of natural talent and natural beauty. And she spoke up. There's 5 days, you're limiting God to 5 days. Where's the faith? Where's the trust in God? If you trust in God, then you trust in God. There's no reason to limit God to only 5 days to do a miracle. Trust in God and to surrender to them is even worse. Pray and God will save us. That's all that you need to do. Her words made a very strong impression, and they listened to her, but they still were worried. Anyway, after everyone listened and they went back to their home, she comes to Uzziah, to the general of the Israeli Defense Force of the time, and she says to him, "I have a plan, but I need your permission to leave the city. You couldn't leave." You have to understand that in the siege, there was the army outside stopping you from leaving. There was also the army inside stopping you from leaving. Just to be sure we're clear here. The Uzziah and his army didn't want the Jews defecting, so you needed permission to leave. So she says to the Uzziah, the Jewish general, "Give permission to my maid and to leave, to go to the camp of the enemy of Holofernes, and there we're going to see the miracles of God." At first, Uzziah was completely like, "This is a terrible idea." He didn't want Yehudis to risk her life, but she insisted that she be allowed to try, and finally, he agrees. She gets all dressed up in her very best clothing, puts on her makeup and everything to make sure she looks very beautiful, and clothing she hadn't worn since her husband passed away. And she goes together with her maid carrying a big basket of very, very strong salty cheese and a very, very strong high alcohol wine. She goes towards the camp of Holofernes. She gets there, it was already getting in the evening, and they say, who are you? The first commander. She says, "I'm a Jewish woman. I've managed to escape, and I've come to surrender myself to Holofernes." Now, God takes one look at her, beautiful woman, all dressed with her maid behind her, and she says, "I have a message for the commander." He right away goes to get her, and sure enough, he hears this beautiful woman outside with a message for Holofernes. She gets brought right in, and Yehudis tells Holofernes how unbearable life has become for, she's making it up, how unbearable life has become, how she couldn't handle it, and finally she bribed the watchman to let her out. And not only did she get bribed to tell him out, but she said that she even made a deal with the watchman. She's going to go back, and she's going to find out what's going on in the city, and they have a deal. And she says to him, "You know that the people are desperate. The people are desperate, and they've all heard of your greatness." And she, a little butter is always good. They've heard of your amazing talent and of your skill and how you're a warrior, that you've never lost a war. And they know we're going to lose to you, but they're holding strong. The city won't fall until they start to eat the non-kosher animals that are left in the city. There's no more kosher food left in town," she says to him. And so you should know that as soon as they succumb to their temptation to eat the non-kosher, that's when you know that their faith will be gone and God will no longer protect them, and they'll be easy for you to conquer. He's very excited about it. So he says, how much longer until they eat the non-kosher foods? I'm telling you, to me any day. I have made up with the watchman that he'll tell me, give me permission to stay here with you. And if you promise that you'll protect me, because the generals will know that I left, that you'll protect me when you conquer the city, I will be your spy, and I'll find out for you exactly when the city is ready to be attacked. You can imagine Holofernes was totally charmed and what's it called, head over heels by this beautiful woman promising to be exactly when will be the right day to attack the city, when they will be spiritually weak because they had eaten the non-kosher food. He gives orders to touch this woman. She should be allowed to go wherever she wants. And they're sitting in the camp, but they're not doing anything. They're waiting for the day when she says it's good to attack. Anyway, she was able to come and go in the camp. She was giving protectia. She had absolute protection. And the next evening she comes, she goes to the watchman, says, give Hosea a message to stay strong in his trust in Hashem. So far, everything is gone exactly to plan. Next day, she comes to the general. She says, General, I have good news for you. From the office, my contact by the gate, my friend that I bribed, he tells me that today there is no more food left at all. And they're ready to hear grumblings and people are starting to eat from the non-kosher food. Give it another day. People eating the food by tomorrow. I'll confirm that everyone's eating non-kosher food. Back the city. So excited. He's so happy to hear this inside news. So she says, that's it. If we're going to have a battle tomorrow, we got a party tonight, right? That's the best way in those days. How do you prepare for war? You didn't go to the shooting range and practice your aim. You got yourself plastered. You got good and drunk, so you wouldn't know the difference anyway. They weren't very sophisticated back then. So that evening is going to be a party with Holofernes, this new spy, who he obviously had other plans for, with Yehudis. Anyway, they come in, and she brings, he has, of course, food there. She says to Holofernes, I appreciate you made food for me. I want you to know that I'm known in town for the cheeses that I would make. I have goats, my own goats. I make delicious cheese. I would like for you to taste some of my cheese. Absolutely. You say no to, especially want some of the cheese. It was a very, very heavy cheese, very, very salty. When you eat salty cheese, what happens? First of all, when you eat something salty, you want more. But you also get thirsty. So she gives him the wine that she had brought with him, special wine, very special, very heavy wine. And she gives him a little bit more of the cheese and a little bit more of the wine. And she knows how to go seduce him to keep on eating and drinking. Eating and drinking. It's not hard to get a man to eat and drink. It's not hard to man in general, but saying to give him food is very easy, especially if it's wine. It's even easier. Cheese, more wine, until he's completely out cold from all the cheese and all the wine that he drank to wash down the extremely salty cheese. He's totally drunk. At that moment, Yehudis offers a prayer to Hashem. So Hashem, answer me the way you answered Yael, another one of the famous heroes of Jewish history. And she pulls out the sword from Holofernes' sheath. She takes the sword with a prayer to Hashem, and she brings down the sword with all of her might and completely severs the head of Holofernes. Well, tough D. It was a strong sword. I'm sure Holofernes had a very, very strong, sharp sword. With all of her might, she took the sword there, came off. She wrapped the head up in the empty towels or whatever, some sheets. She put it into the basket that she had full of cheese and wine that was now empty because this man had eaten all the cheese and drunk all the wine. She puts the head of Holofernes, and she says to her maid, "Come, let's go walk with slowly, not to arouse suspicion." And they walk leisurely back through the camp. And by now, everyone knew who she was. No one stopped her. She was the personal possession of the general. And she comes to the gates of the city. She says to the guard, "Take me to Hosea at once." This is the middle of the night. Comes to Hosea, and she says, she comes in. So what's going on? She said, "Look inside my basket." He looks inside the basket. There's no cheese in there. Better than cheese was the head. Hello. Inside the basket is the head of his enemy, the head of Holofernes. He couldn't believe his eyes. She says to him, prepare the men now. No one in the camp knows that he's dead. They think that he's sleeping with me. Get everyone ready. By dawn, there needs to be an attack on the camp. They're going to run to the commander's tent. They're going to see him dead without a head. Literally, that sounds like a song, dead without a head. They'll see him dead, and there'll be total confusion. We know until organize the camp to prepare the counter attack, and you'll be victorious. Sure enough, that's exactly what happened. At dawn, all the men of the Jews that were starving, had no energy, come running out of the camp, out of the city. The officers, the soldiers are ready to fight back. They run to the tent, the Holofernes. What do they find? A headless body. Complete panic breaks through the camp, and they come with the head of Holofernes on top of a spear. See the head on top of a spear, they realize that they've lost, and all the men of the army flee in terror, and they leave behind all their weapons and all their food and all their everything. And it was a tremendous victory that happened in the merit of Yehudis, the daughter of Yechanan, the Kohen Gadol, from the family of the Chashmonaim. That is the most famous of the three Chanukah heroines, the story of Yehudis. Now, I take you to the second most famous story. The name of the spy was Yehudis. She was actually a fake spy. She wasn't a real spy. She was a very, very, very righteous woman. And I love to see the comments, how you love waking up and sleep with the teaching. Baruch Hashem. Everyone's watching. Yes. Okay. Don't forget, charity.com/you care. Okay. Just a little. Do you do like ads in the middle of the programming, right? Stop for all. And now we're sponsored. Hold the card. Where's the card? Where's the card? Here, these are the little cards. Where's the big card? There's a nice picture. This is just a pledge card from Sun. There was cards with a picture of front lines of the family, front lines of community, front lines of whatever. It's okay. If you're watching and you're enjoying, charity.com/your care. YOURCARE. Thank you very much because it's double. We appreciate it. By the way, we were at close to like at 40-something%. If we can get to 50% tonight, that would be amazing. So someone do me a miracle, please. Do us a miracle. All of us in this room need a miracle. Big miracle. Okay, thank you, Michelle. And then after our word, we go back to our presentation. Yeah, that's just one of the many front lines of Jewish identity, front lines of Jewish pride, etc. Okay, story number 2, with a woman called Chana. Now, I happen to love the name Chana. Yes. So Chana is living in Israel. She has 7 sons. Now, this is at the beginning of the Chanukah story when Antiochus is still in the land of Israel. If you remember 2 weeks ago, I told you, we were going through the whole history, how the whole story started. Antiochus was fighting against the Egyptians. He was from Syria. So the Greek Empire had been divided. There was the Syrian Greeks and there was the Egyptian Greeks. And he was fighting against the Egyptian Greeks, and then the Romans had to stop fighting. But he was in Israel, very, very angry. And that's when the whole story started, all the decrees which we talked about 2 weeks ago. At that time, there was a very famous family living in Israel. Her name was Chana. And Chana these children were also from a very illustrious family. And Antiochus had many laws, not to learn Torah, not to have a circumcision, not to keep Shabbos, many laws. And he heard about these boys that were learning Torah. They were caught learning Torah. So he decided to take Antiochus was there. So he comes to one of the courthouses or wherever, and this child of Chana is being tried for the crime of learning Torah. He's being tried. So Antiochus hears these 7 boys who were all in the law of the king. And so Antiochus tries to convince the oldest boy to abandon the Torah. They were a very illustrious family. Also, there was no father. I don't know. It's not clear who her husband was, but this is at the beginning of the Chanukah story. And so Antiochus said to the boy, abandon your Torah, come become a Greek like us. And the oldest of Chana's sons responds to Antiochus and says, I would rather die as a Jew and die for my Torah than to give up my religion, to give up my history, to give up my people. And you're wasting your time talking to me, trying to convince me. You're never going to convince me to give up on my Yiddishkeit. When Antiochus hears that, he gets so angry that he orders that the boy's tongue should be cut out. Yes, this is not a bedtime story. I warn you now. It's not going to be a happy ending. But he has his tongue cut out for talking so disgusting to the king. And the king is wasting his time talking to him. And then he's tell the boy, now bow down. The boy refuses. He chops off each one of the boy's hands. And then he chops off his feet. Starts to burn. Oldest of sons, limb by limb. Limb by limb. And Chana and his younger brother are watching this. And Antiochus was sure that the sight of literally chopping to pieces the living child of Chana would cause that the other children would be afraid, until he literally cuts up the oldest child and he chopped up a piece his body parts, and instead of scaring the children, the exact opposite happens. He calls the second son of Chana and he says to him, either bow down and accept me as a god and accept the Greek way of life, I'm going to kill you even more painfully than I killed your brother. And the second son says, I'm not afraid of you. You can do whatever you want. I was born a Jew. I will die a Jew. And I am no less than my brother in my devotion to Hashem. And there's nothing you can do that will make me give up my connection to Hashem. And Antiochus, if you remember, the context is important. He was angry. He lost this war against the Egyptians. So he was looking for a scapegoat. And Antiochus tortures the second son with even more violence and more danger than the way he tortured the first son. Even worse. And then he comes to and each child refuses to be intimidated, and each child stays strong and stays committed and stays steadfast and refuses to allow Antiochus to intimidate them. And the bloodlust of the king, each child, you think you torture a child, you chop off their hands and their feet while they're still alive, you would think they'll kind of satiate your desire for blood. It only made him more and more angry until the sixth brother came, and Chana was standing there encouraging them, standing there watching what happened to their children. After the sixth boy had been tortured, each child was tortured more excruciatingly than the last. I only know the first one that they first chopped out his tongue and his hands and his feet. Each one was tortured worse than the other one had been tortured. Finally comes to the seventh boy. The seventh boy was only 7 years old. Talking about a little boy, not a little boy. And when they bought the boy, the king said, I'm going to have to change my tactics now. After 6 kids being tortured to death and nothing happens, he says to the little boy, I think I will promise you gold and silver, whatever you want. If you will promise to become a Greek like us, I will make you wealthy and rich. Just need to accept our ways. What do you think the boy says? What do you think the boy says? No way. The boy says, I like my brothers. I will die just like my brothers died. So the king knew this has happened. In fact, I don't know which will happen first. The king said to the boy, I'll tell you what. You don't have to bow down to me. I'm going to drop my ring on the floor, and you bend down to pick it up and give it back to me, so it will look like you bowed down to me. And even that the boy wouldn't do. Then he turns to his mother, to Chana. And he says, woman, have compassion upon this child, persuade him to do my will, so at least one of your children will still be alive. So Chana calls the boy over to the side. Chana kisses her youngest son. Chana says, my son, I carried you in my womb for 9 months. I nursed you for 2 years, and I fed you until today. I taught you Torah. I taught you about God. I taught you to fear God and to uphold his laws. And you should know that everything that exists in the world exists because of God. Man was created to serve God. This king that seems to have control over us right now is just a test from Hashem. And if you think that he can have mercy on you, he doesn't. Only Hashem can decide what will happen to a person. God controls your life. God will decide when you will live, and God will take your soul when God desires. Don't allow yourself to be persuaded by a man of flesh and blood when God is really the one in charge. And so Hannah returns back to the king. She says, I couldn't convince him. That's what he says, to go to bow down to pick up the ring. And the king, the boy says to the Antiochus, I refuse to bow down. I refuse to even pretend to bow down. I know that God is in charge, and God is in charge of you, and that you are not in charge. You're only a human being, and God is the master, the king of the universe. And with that, he chopped off the head of the youngest 7-year-old boy of Hannah. After that, Hannah was left childless. And the Talmud tells a story. At that moment, she went up to the roof, to the rooftop. And she said, Avram Avinu, you should know that you only offered one of your children as an offering on the altar. I offered all 7 of my children as an offering on the altar, having set off the roof, and she was buried together with her martyred children. That is as terrible as yet. I warn you, this will not be a happy bedtime story. Wow. But this is when you understand what the Jews went through in the story of Chanukah. Now that you have a little bit of an idea of what they went through. This is no... I want to rephrase this from the best story to the worst. To like gruesome to more gruesome. Okay. From the gruesome stories to the less gruesome stories. The next story I'm going to tell you has a happy ending, okay? Okay? We're going to end with a happy ending. What? Yeah, we'll have to sing some song. We didn't do the menorah lighting on... didn't even see the menorah lighting here, but it's okay. Here's our menorah lit. There's a beautiful menorah. Time for another ad. charity.com/YourCare. No, I'm just joking. Okay. Okay, listen, guys. We're still not at 50%. I don't know what we're holding. I haven't looked. Okay. Now, the last story, which is not a known story at all, but it's also with a woman called Hannah. I told you I like Hannahs, right? So we're going to do a lot of Hannah stories. So Hannah is actually who's nice. So Saturday night I did a trick question. We played true and false. Right? There was a trick question that Matasio had 5 children. True or false? Did Matasio have 5 children? True or false? It was a trick question. It was a trick question. He had 5 sons. He had 5 sons and 1 daughter. Very good. He paid attention Saturday night. So Matasio had. Oh, we got people watching from Uganda. I love it, and from Alexandria, Virginia, and from Mexico. And I can't see further up than that. So you have to comment again. And of course, people watching on our page too. Hello, good evening, Beth. Good evening, Gail. Good evening, Faith. Okay. So Matasio had 5 sons and a daughter. And the daughter's name was Hannah. Hannah was a pretty popular name even back then. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this now. One of the many decrees that the Greeks put upon the Jews during the story of Chanukah was that every Jewish woman, before she got married, on the night of her wedding, before she could go home, had to go spend the night with the Greek governor. And this was one of the many ways that the Greeks were trying to destroy the sanctity and the intimacy of Jewish life by violating and raping these Jewish brides on the night of the wedding to transform what should have been a night of happiness and of joy and of celebration, the marriage of a brand new couple who started their married life together, said to one of fear and terror. And this also is one of the terrible, terrible decrees of the Greeks against the Jews. And so the sister of the Maccabees, it came her wedding night. Hannah was engaged to get married, and they come to the wedding hall, and no one wanted to fight. You have to understand, before the Maccabees stood up, we don't appreciate how it's like fighting America, right? Imagine you want to fight America. They're the superpower of the world. To fight the Greek army was impossible. It required tremendous bravery, and no one was willing to stand up to the Greeks. The first few years before the Maccabees started to fight, the reign of terror that Antiochus unleashed on the Jewish people in Israel was horrific. True, I mean, you're getting an idea now. The story of Hannah's 7 sons was horrific. And this is just one example where the governor is taking Jewish girls on the night of their wedding from the wedding hall, instead of going home with their husbands, to his husband. It's the night of Hannah's wedding. And Hannah stands up in the wedding hall, and you know what she does? She uncovers herself. She exposes herself in her wedding gown. And her brothers are horrified. Can you imagine the shanda, the scandal? at a wedding is before they had TMZ and paparazzi, to get on the front page. Matasyahu's daughter exposes herself at wedding, and I couldn't believe it. Here she was exposed. I told you, Marsha's not here either. No, she doesn't preach the radar. But at her wedding, she took off her wedding dress, so she exposed herself on her wedding, just revealing her part of her body. And gasped, was just at the top of her, by her gown, the top. And her brother was rose, dragging from the room. And she said, for me to expose myself here in public, everyone gets, you're so zealous that you're going to come and defend my honor. But the fact that in an hour from now, I'm going to be taken by the governor's officers to his house, that no one's willing to defend. Understand? She was very smart. She was very smart. And she really put the guilt on them, hardcore. You're so defensive of the honor of a Jewish girl to be exposed in an improper way, for me to expose my chest and remove my wedding gown like that. And yet I'm going to be taken to the palace of the governor's house tonight. Why are you not going to fight against them to defend me? And she riled up her brothers at the wedding, and they charged from the wedding. They went to the house of the governor, and they killed all the officers of the governor to save her from having to go to the governor's office. And that is one of the ways how the war started. Even though the classic stories of the war started with Matasyahu and Modin fighting against the officers there's another version of the story that the war actually began on the night of Hannah's wedding. On the night of her wedding, where they went to they literally, all the guests led by the brothers of Khan and the sons of Matasyahu, Yehuda the Maccabee, etc. Their first battle was to kill the governor that was going to rape their sister, on her wedding night. So it's a happy ending story because her honor was indeed protected. She was able to, change around her brothers and get them to join her in saving her from what would have been a horrific fate. And now let me teach you something amazing in Kabbalah. So there's a question, which is, why is there no book of the story of Chanukah? We have the Megillah of Esther, and we read every year on Purim. We all gather in the shul, and we hear the book being read, and we know all the details, exactly who came, who went, and when Haman was in power, and he fell down, and then how Mordechai went on the horse. Why don't we read in the shul the book of the Megillah of Antiochus, or the book of the Maccabees? They're real books that exist, that just were the rabbis deliberately chose not to include it in Tanakh. And we discussed this 2 weeks ago. They chose which books. The Song of Songs made the cut. This book did not make. Sefer, the book of the Maccabees, was on the editor's table. Sefer HaMaccabeim was on the discussion, and there were some rabbis that wanted to include it. And as I think I mentioned 2 weeks ago, some actually have the custom to read the book of the Maccabees, but it's not really today anymore, but in the olden times. And so why don't we have that book today? So there's a beautiful Kabbalistic idea. I'm trying to remember now who it's from. It's from Shabtai. The name of the rabbi is Rabbi Shabtai Cohen. I heard this from Shei's Talmud. It's Rabbi Shabtai Cohen, who wrote a Sefer of Kabbalah. Anyway, so he explains as follows. Matisyahu is a continuation of the soul of Yosef HaTzadik. So now Joseph, who is the main hero of the Torah reading of these weeks. So if we're not talking about the Torah reading this week, then we're talking about Chanukah. But if we were talking about this week's Torah portion, what will we be talking about? The story of Joseph in the house of Potiphar. Now Potiphar's wife was desperate for this really good-looking guy called Joseph. And one day when he was alone in the house, and everyone was celebrating their holiday, she tried to seduce him to be with him. And he refused and he ran away. And as a result of his morality and his unwillingness to bend even a little bit in his spiritual status and his ethics, he was thrown into prison, which is a whole story for itself, until he ended up in the king's palace. In Kabbalah, there's 10 sefirot. And everyone has a soul. Every soul has a spiritual source where that soul comes from. We talk about classes, is different worlds. The world has 10 sefirot. You have the soul of a holy tzaddik, we from the world of Atzilus. But even in that world, you have a soul that's from Chesed of Atzilus. For example, Abraham was a man of kindness. His soul in Kabbalah, we know, is a soul of Chesed of Atzilus, kindness of Atzilus. And Yitzchak, his son Isaac, is from Gevura, discipline, strength of Atzilus. Yaakov is from Tiferes of Atzilus. Different, most of us are not from Atzilus, but we also have these different spiritual components. That's why some people will be naturally more generous. Some people are naturally more compassionate. Some people are naturally more disciplined and focused. Some are naturally more competitive, have more netzach and more of a desire to prove their greatness. Some naturally are more bonding and they're more connected. Yosef is the soul of Yisod. Yisod is about bonding. What does bonding mean? The idea of connection. So again, I'm not giving a Kabbalah class now, but Yisod is what takes the 6 midot, 6 emotions, that then come to Malchus. And Malchus is considered the queen. So the 6 emotions are considered the male, and Malchus is considered the female because they merge together in a harmony. And the act of intimacy, male and female, uniting. So in the emotional character, the makeup of a person, you have the 6 midos, the 6 emotions: kindness and compassion and discipline and victory and submission, and they all merge together into the queen, which is Malchus, which is a Mal. So these different midot have different body parts. Chesed is the right arm, Vura is the left arm, Tiferet is the torso, Netzach and Hod are the 2 thighs, the 2 legs, and Yisod, bonding, connection, is the reproductive organ of the person. That is the body part that physically is a metaphor and represents the spiritual energy of the attribute of Yisod. So Yosef represents Yisod, which is why he was challenged with a spiritual challenge of reproductive intimacy between man and woman. His greatest test was a moment that would have violated his ability to reproduce, violated his spiritual power of intimacy that's expressed in the attribute of Yisod, and he overcame it. So he meets Yehuda. Yehuda is Malchus, but I believe that. Matisyahu, the Maccabees, the Chashmonaim, Matisyahu is a continuation of the soul of Yosef, which means that Matisyahu's spiritual challenge, the spiritual life's work, is also Yisod. Yisod is about connection, about bonding, about a sense of feeling, empathy, because Yisod is also the connection of Tiferet. Tiferet is compassion, where you feel sympathy for somebody else. Yisod is not compassion. Yisod is feeling empathy, where you really feel an actual, I feel your pain, I feel connected to you. Matisyahu and the Maccabees represent Yisod, meaning in practical English, like this clear and simple, they represent the power and the challenge of the intimacy being pure and holy of a Jew. Meaning the Jews had many struggles and challenges in our history. We had the story of Pesach. It wasn't a challenge against the spirituality of the Jewish people in how our intimacy and how our reproduction will be pure and holy. It was a fight against our very existence, right? With the story of Purim. These were all different challenges that didn't affect the spirituality of the Jewish people. When was our intimacy challenged? Specifically on Chanukah. And I talked about this on Shabbos a little bit as well. That's why they left us oil, but not pure oil. But it was there, but not the purity was gone. The spirituality, the holiness was gone. The Maccabees had to fight a war, as expressed in this 3rd story of Hannah, who lived at a time when Jewish girls were being violated. The intimacy, the ability of a couple to get married and build a home together in purity have been taken away from the Jewish people. In fact, the entire idea of building a Jewish home with a bris milah was forbidden by the Greeks. The Egyptians didn't stop circumcision. The Persians didn't stop circumcision. The nation in Jewish history that fought against bris milah, that made it forbidden for a Jew to have a circumcision, was the Greeks. They didn't mind you reproducing. Just don't do it with a holy organ. Do it in the unholy way. Same thing with Shabbos. You can have holidays, but you can't have a Shabbos where you acknowledge God brings holiness into your week. Same thing with Rosh Chodesh. You can't have holiness in your calendar. You can have a calendar, but Rosh Chodesh is the Jewish counting of the calendar. They wanted to remove the holiness and the spirituality of our intimacy. And therefore, what did the Maccabees have to fight against? What started the war? As I mentioned, the story of Hannah instigating her brothers on the night of her wedding to fight for the ability of the Jewish people to have holy intimacy, purity in our home in a way that our intimacy is not defiled and violated and desecrated by the ways of the Greeks. So now, why do we not have a Megillah today? A written story of Chanukah? Because, says Rabbi Shabtai Cohen, the story of Chanukah has not yet ended to be written into a book. Every holiday, we remember the holiday because we're reminiscing and we're reconnecting to the energy of what was. So there once was against the Jewish people in Egypt. God did miracles, and those miracles happened, and it's over. So now we have a story about what happened then. Purim happened. The miracles that happened, the divine energy of hapichu, of transformation, whatever, those miracles happened. That divine energy happened. And now we reconnect to it, we talk about it, to remember what happened then. The story of Chanukah didn't happen. It's still happening. The story of Chanukah is still happening till today. Still happening. The challenge against the purity and the sanctity of a Jewish marriage, of Jewish intimacy, of Jewish bonding, of Jewish love, of Jewish couples marrying Jewish couples, and having healthy Jewish homes is under threat today like it was back then. And that challenge didn't go away. And that's why there's no book, according to Kabbalah, according to Kabbalistic teachings, of Chanukah. Because the story is not over yet. The story of the Jewish people struggling to maintain holiness in our homes is still a story of the Jewish people till today. And that's why it's not written in a book, because it's not over. A book is only something that's already done. The other challenges to our existence, to our physical ability to live, those challenges we don't face it anymore. Even with Hamas and all that, we're not under threat for our existence. Today we have the ability to fight back. But the challenges, the threat to our spirituality, the challenges and the threat to our holiness, specifically in the inside of our homes, not on the outside, not in our generosity, in our teaching Jewish values to the world, but in the way we live internally in our own homes with purity, with holiness. That's still the story. There was a story of the Chanukah and the story of the Maccabees and the story of the Jews living in the times of the Second Temple. That story is exactly still our story today. And if you look around, you see this clearly. That is where the Jewish people are really struggling. That is our challenge. How to keep the holiness, not only in the synagogue, not only the way we express to the world, although we need to work on that too a little bit more, but primarily, where do we struggle the most? In recognizing our Jewishness in private, recognizing our Jewishness in our bedrooms, in our spouses, in our boyfriends, in our girlfriends, in the way we live privately. Is it with holiness? Is it with purity? Is it with the sanctity of a Jew? Or have we allowed the Greeks to defile our circumcision, to defile our innermost part of our identity, which was the last thing of the Jewish people to be attacked by our enemies, because it was the deepest, right? It takes time to get in. And this is the last challenge the Jews face in exile before the redemption. Perhaps the greatest challenge of all the challenges we've ever faced in history. A challenge we're still struggling with. The challenge of living not only externally as a Jew, but internally, in private, intimacy like a Jew. And that's the story of the Maccabees, and that's our story today, which began with Chana and her brothers fighting for her liberation. Okay, that, my friends, is the story of 3 brave women and the story of all of us who need to live as Jews to the world and live as Jews at home. Thank you for joining us.